Very difficult medrash. The medrash says that the entire sukkah, it's interesting that the medrash has to do with Simchas Torah Shmini Atzeres. The medrash says that the whole sukkah, we bring a total of 70 korbanos to protect the nations of the world. And because we focus on them for the entire 7 days of Sukkot for their benefit, so they should love us. Comes Shmini Atzeres, and they still hate us. So that's reason to be besimcha. He said, the Goyim still hate us after they should love us. That's why we should be besimcha. Get to that. The Gemara says one of the reasons that Har Sinai was called Sinai, Shemisham Yorda Sina L'Umos Ha'olam. According to some, what it means is that from the time the Torah was given, that's when Sinas Israel started. That's why Goyim hate us, because of Matan Torah. And there's a more famous Maimer Chazal, Biyadua Halacha L'Moshe Misinai She'esav Soni Yisrael. Goyim hate Jews. Or is that true? All Goyim hate Jews. They're Chasidei Umos Ha'olam. Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. What does that mean? Right? There are a lot of Goyim that don't hate Jews. The Goyim that saved Jews during the Holocaust at the risk of their own lives. What does that mean? To understand it, I want to give a hakdama, and then we'll come back and understand what the roots of anti-Semitism are. There's a Rashi in the end of Parshas Kedoshim. Rashi brings down the Chazal on the Pasuk, V'avdil eschem min ha'amim lios li. I separated you from the nations of the world to be mine. And on that Chazal said the following, In atem muvdalim atem shali. If you separate yourself from the nations of the world, then you're mine. The Imlav, and if you don't separate yourself from the nations of the world, then you belong to Nebuchadnezzar and his friends. Perhaps the simple meaning is that if you separate yourself from the nations of the world and you don't do all the abominations that they do, so you're mine, I'll protect you. And if not, I give you over into the hands of your enemies like Nebuchadnezzar. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say, I'm going to give you over into the hands of your enemies. It says you belong to them. And also, why mention Nebuchadnezzar? We had plenty of enemies before him and after him. Why single Nebuchadnezzar out? I think what that Chazal means is the following. We have a chiyuv to be much different than the nations of the world. The Rebbe Shem created Goyim, he created Yidden. The Goyim are not an afterthought. They're not excessive baggage here. There's a reason why they exist. And if they keep their 7 mitzvahs, then they'll get a share in the world to come. We don't have a monopoly on Olam Haba. But our roles in this world are very different. Goyim keeps 7 mitzvahs. Basically, the number 7 represents the physical, natural world, including Shabbos. So Goyim have to keep this world uncorrupted, undistorted, and if they live and build this physical world, then they'll get a share in the world to come. As long as they don't corrupt the world, they don't murder and they don't steal and they don't serve Avodah Zarah and so on. We have a different goal, a different purpose in this world. We are supposed to be a mamleches kohanim, the goy kadosh. We're not supposed to be just moral. We're supposed to be moral, but not only moral. We're supposed to be holy. Not just moral, but holy. Goyim don't have to be holy. They just have to be moral. So our mitzvah starts on the 8th with Bris Milah, beyond the physical world, beyond the natural world. To give you an example of the kind of life that a goy could lead, not to intimate that all goyim lead this kind of life, but even if a goy lived the life I'm going to describe, he could get olam haba for it. I once was on a plane years and years ago when I lived in Cleveland. I was in the Kola hotels. So I was once on a plane that was going from New York to Cleveland. I had been in New York for some kind of rabbinic occasion, and I was traveling back to Cleveland, back home. And the plane taxied onto the runway and pulled off to the side and just sat there. Didn't take off. And we were waiting half an hour, 45 minutes. And they weren't telling us what the problem was. And everybody was getting pretty nervous. Why isn't this plane taking off? We're sitting there like hostages. So they didn't want to tell us what the problem was, obviously, but they were concerned that everybody was getting nervous. So they opted to give out free drinks, not Coca-Cola, but liquor. And the Irishman behind me had a few of them. And he became very happy. He got up and he started walking around the plane looking for friends of his from Cleveland who were also going back home. And he called them to his seat, which was right behind my seat. And he tells them, I have a story to tell you. You got to hear this story. He was talking so loud that if I was in a plane in the air, I would have heard him. There was no way of avoiding hearing what this guy's story was. So I figured the Rabbi wants me to hear the story, so I paid attention. He tells his friends, you know that my wife passed away about a half a year ago, and I've been in a terrible depression since then. My son is a very wealthy physician in New York. He called me a few weeks ago and he said, Dad, I want to get you out of your depression. I want you to come to New York, and I will take you around to see the big city, the sights of the big city, get your mind off mourning for my mother, and you'll have a good time. So I took him up on it. He put me up in a 5-star hotel, and every day he took me somewhere else to get my mind off my mourning. So the last night was the zenith of my trip. My son took me to one of the 10 most luxurious restaurants in the world that happens to be in New York. He mentioned the name of the restaurant. I didn't catch it. I'm sure the hashgacha was not up to my standard. And he said, you have no idea. We came to this restaurant. They sat us at a table fit for King Arthur. We sat in thrones at this beautiful table. They gave us a menu. I couldn't even read half the menu. But I noticed that the most expensive item on the menu was a 7-course, 3-pound steak meal. 7 courses, and the main course was 3 pounds of steak. You have to understand what that is. In these fast food restaurants, so each hamburger is a 1/4 pound of meat. That means 12 of them is 3 pounds. It's a little cow. That's just the meat. That's not the side dishes, and that's not 7 courses. So he said, I don't think I'll ever be in a restaurant like this again in my life, and my son can afford it. I'm going for the top of the menu. So I ordered the 7-course, 3-pound steak meal, and they served it, and I finished it from soup to nuts. When I finished the meal, I noticed that there were 2 very distinguished people in tuxedos standing by my table with a scroll. One of them introduces himself. I am the maitre d' of the restaurant, and this is the owner of the restaurant. And you are the 7th person in the history of this restaurant who finished the 7-course, 3-pound steak meal and didn't ask for a doggy bag. So we have a special scroll made up. All we have to do is fill in the blanks like a ksuba, and it testifies to the fact that you finished this 30-pound steak meal on this and this date, and we sign it, and you have it for posterity. The guy was mamish, tears in his eyes. He said, you have no idea how I felt. He said, but that wasn't everything. After that, they told me to look at the table, the wall opposite my table, and on that wall were 6 plaques, what's called 6 bronze plaques with names on them and dates. They told me, those are the 6 people before you who finished the 7-course, 3-pound steak meal. Tomorrow we're going out and getting a 7th plaque with your name and tonight's date, and you will be on the wall of our restaurant for all time. The man now was crying. First I wanted to ask him if there were little bulbs on those plaques, because that would have been not a good sign what happened to those 6 people before. But I kept my mouth shut. At this point, he started to cry. And he said, I feel fulfilled. I don't know if I have any more purpose to live. I davened very, with a lot of kavanah at that moment, that before this plane takes off, someone stands up who heard this story, and everybody on the plane heard it, and tells him that there's a restaurant somewhere in the world that serves a 7-course, 4-pound steak meal. What difference did it make? I was afraid the Beis and Shomala, they heard what he said, and they said, he's right. He has no more purpose to live. So when we take off, we're taking him down. And I'm sitting right in front of him. I don't know if I would survive that. So I was hoping he had a purpose to live by the time that we took off. A goy could conceivably live a life where his entire purpose in life is to eat a 7-course, 3-pound steak meal, as long as he didn't steal the meat, he didn't take it from a live animal, he didn't curse the Rabbi Shalom because it was too tough, he didn't steal it from anybody, he didn't commit any other sins. They'll get a share in the world to come for a life like that. If a Yid lives a life like that, right, he's not going to get Olam Haba for it. That's what it says. V'avdil eschem min ha'amim, lios li. I separated you not from the bad ones, from the best of the goyim, the ones who keep all 7 mitzvahs, who are moral, and they don't corrupt this world. And if they live a life like that, they'll get Olam Haba for it. But you, if you live a life like that, you're supposed to be v'osuli mikdash v'shochanti v'socha. You're supposed to be my mikdash. Mikdash is not a building. The building is a catalyst that makes us the mikdash. Mikdash means a place where God's presence devolves in the world. We're supposed to be a mamleches kohanim. We're supposed to be an empire of kohanim. A kohen is God's representative to the Jewish people. And we are God's representatives to the world. How do we do that? By living a life of kedusha, not just moral, but kodesh. So if we do that, harei atem shali, you're my representatives. But if you don't do that, then you belong to a very select group of people. You belong to the group of Nebuchadnezzar. What did Nebuchadnezzar do? He destroyed the mikdash. He destroyed a mikdash of stone and wood. And if you live a life like that, you're destroying the mikdash of your heart. So you belong to that group. Because we are responsible to live a holy life. What's the difference between being moral and being holy? I'll give you an example. When I first moved to Eretz Yisrael, so I had 2 houses. one house where I and my family live, and the other house my Sfarim. Thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of Sfarim. And I made a deal with the Moshav that I would have a place for them. And since they had a lot of extra houses at that time, there were only 11 families, and the government had built 30 houses. So we had extra houses, so they gave me the house across from my house for my Sfarim. My house had 3 bedrooms, my wife and myself, and we had, Kenai her 11 children at the time, 6 boys and 5 girls. So the 6 boys were in one room in triple bunk beds. The one on the top hit his head on the ceiling every morning. And the girls were in their room, five girls in one room. And I had a study right across from my house with my Sfarim, but there were 2 bedrooms in that study. When my 2 oldest daughters became teenagers, they came to me and they said, we no longer can be in a room together with our little bratty sisters. It's beneath our dignity. We need a room, each one for themselves, where we can decorate it that befits a young Jewish woman, and we need our space, and we can't be together with our little sisters. So I said, okay, but you don't have any more bedrooms. He said, yes, we do. Across from the study, there are 2 bedrooms. So we want to move across, opposite our house, and we'll occupy those 2 rooms. Each of us will have a bedroom, and we'll be like young ladies, not like little girls. So I said, fine. So they moved into the study. Each one decorated their own bedroom. They had their own space. Until Pesach. Pesach came, I had an old, sickly uncle who never got married, and he was their babysitter when we lived in America. And that old uncle came to stay with us every year between Pesach and Shavuos. And we put him in the study. There's no other place for him. So I told my daughters, you're going to have to move back into the house for the next 7 weeks, because your uncle is going to have to take one of those bedrooms. So I said, we thought about that. We have an answer. We will both move into one room, and he can have the other room. And Shalom Al Yisrael. I told him, you can't do that. It's yichud. You're not allowed to be alone in that house with your old sick uncle. They said, Tati, that's ridiculous. He's an old sick uncle who was our babysitter. We're sure that he has no evil designs on us. And we promise you, we have absolutely no interest in him. So we will both move into one room, and he can be in the other room, and we're not moving back into the house. I said, you can't do that. It's yichud. I said, it's true. From a moral standpoint, if only we had to be moral, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you being in one room and him being in another room, and nothing's going to happen that's immoral. But we have to be kodesh. And kedusha is that even if there's the slightest possibility of something not being kosher v'yosher, that's not what we do. So you have to move back in, because we're a goy kadosh. We're not just a moral nation, we're a holy nation. So that's the difference between being holy and being moral. So we have to create a different standard in this world, because we have to represent the Rebbeinu Shalom. When people look at us and they say, wow, these people live a holy life, there must be a God, because they represent a godly way of living. So we're God's representatives to the world. In order for us to maintain that role, there has to be a separation between Yidden and Goyim. Torah says we're an Am Levad Ad Yishkon. We're a nation that dwells apart, not isolated from the world, because we're supposed to influence the world. If we're isolated, how can we influence them? But we have to be insulated from the world. That's what the word Badad means. In modern Hebrew, bidud is insulation. We're insulated from the world. The Rambam says in Hilchos Deis, derech briyoso shel adam. It's the very nature of a person to be influenced by his surroundings, by the people around him. It's not something that can happen. It's something that we created for the good purpose. God wants us to be influenced for the good. Not everybody can do everything, so everybody has to work together and be influenced by other people. But when there's a power in the world, it can be used equally for the good or the bad, otherwise there's no free choice. So that same power that God gave, that people are influenced one from the other, can be used for the bad too. And if you're around the bad influence, you're influenced for the bad. But it's not just bad. If we're supposed to maintain a standard of holiness, and we are exposed to an environment of morality, but not holiness, then we're both going to reach the lowest common denominator. So there has to be a certain separation, insulation between the Jewish people and between the non-Jewish world. Not the bad ones, the good ones, because we have a different standard. We have a different lifestyle. The Meiri says that the evil or the negative influences in this world are like a yam, like the sea, like the ocean. And the way to escape it is a boat. Now, on the surface, that doesn't make any sense. You can't escape the ocean in a boat. A boat can only float on the ocean. Can't escape it. What he should have said is, the way of escaping the ocean of negative influences is an amphibious craft. Get out of the ocean. But it's very clear what the Meiri means. There's no way of getting out of the ocean. There are negative influences everywhere. Everywhere. Even in Chicago. But everywhere. Even in Moshav Matityahu. Even in Bnei Brak. Even in Meir Shari. There's always negative influences. You can't run away from them and you can't escape them. The most you can do is build a boat and insulate yourself from them. So you're not isolated, you're not out of the ocean, but you can't let the ocean come in. That's the only way, is to build a waterproof boat, a boat. And that's what the Torah says. You have to be an Am Levodad Yishkon, a nation that dwells insulated from the rest of the world. And Chazal say that Yidden are like oil and Goyim are like water. You can't amalgamate water and oil together. The water and the oil can exist very nicely, coexist, if the oil floats on top of the water. There's a surface tension that separates between the oil and the water, then the oil protects the water and the water supports the oil. But once you try to mix the oil into the water, it won't last. And not only won't it last, but the oil will eventually rise to the surface, and what will push the oil to the surface is the pressure of the water. And that's why the Medrash says we only have two choices. Either we accept the fact that we have to separate ourselves and insulate ourselves from the non-Jewish world, and again, not the bad ones. That goes without saying. But the good ones, and the ones who keep Sheva Mitzvah Noach. But that's not our lifestyle. And if we're not insulated from them, then we'll reach the lowest common denominator. So if we understand that, and we create our own society, and the ideal is to have our own country. That's what Eretz Yisrael is made for. Eretz Yisrael is a place where we're supposed to create our own society with our own values and our own standards. It's an Eretz HaKodesh, where we're supposed to live a life of Kedusha. And in that way, we are supposed to influence the world, that there's a God in this world, because we're living a godly existence. Not exactly what's going on in Eretz Yisrael today in most places, right? Even though to a certain degree we are fulfilling that, at least Israeli politics, when the nations of the world view and hear about Israeli politics, what do they say? Oh my God. So we're fulfilling that in a little bit of a way. But that's not what it meant. So that was the purpose of Eretz Yisrael, to become an Eretz Kodesh with people living Kedusha like we explained. So if we choose to do that, the Medrash says, then we'll read on Simchas Torah a pasuk by Yishkon Yisrael Betach Badad. Zos HaBracha, we read it on Simchas Torah B'Simcha. If we choose not to live a life that is insulated from the nations of the world, and we choose to assimilate into the nations of the world, then we're not going to accomplish too much of not being insulated. We're going to be insulated whether we like it or not. But then we'll read a different pasuk. Sitting on the floor on Tisha B'Av, we'll read Eicha Yoshva Badad. The Badad is going to be whether we like it or not. That's our role. We can read it B'Simcha, or we can read it on Tisha B'Av. But the Badad is going to remain. Chaim Volozhiner says it much stronger. He said the Jew has two choices. Either we make Kiddush, or the Goy will make Havdalah. Either we sanctify ourselves and separate ourselves from the nations of the world in a positive way, or the Goy will make Havdalah, he'll separate us. And that's been our history. We lived very nicely in Goshen, in Mitzrayim, when we were insulated from the Egyptians. You know when the Shibud Mitzrayim started, the Medrash says? When Batzimole Ha'aretz Osam, they started going to the Egyptian circuses and the Egyptian theaters, and they started to assimilate into Egyptian culture, then Vayokom Melech Chadash HaMitzrayim. The same thing happened in Spain, and the same thing happened in Germany. Whenever we try to mix the oil into the water pushes the oil out. Whenever we don't make Kiddush, the Goy makes Havdalah. So that is our destiny. Now let's go back to what we started. First of all, we have to qualify and explain what the word Sina means. We normally think that Sina means hatred. I hate your guts. It's not true. I'll prove it to you in a second. Ahava, which is the antithesis of Sina, means a connection. Doesn't necessarily mean that you love somebody. It means that you feel connected to somebody. Ahava in Gematria is Echad. You feel a connection. There's some kind of affinity. That is the foundation of Ahava. When you feel a connection to somebody, so then that can lead to what we call love. But the foundation, the root of that Ahava is feeling connected to somebody. Sina is the opposite, where there's a lack of connection. Chazal say if you didn't speak to somebody because you have complaints against them for 3 days, you're considered a soulmate. That doesn't mean you hate the person's guts. You just disassociated yourself. That dissociation is called Sina. The biggest proof to that is the following. Torah says, Vayehav es Rachel mi Leah. Yaakov Avinu loved Rachel more than Leah. So he loved Leah, he just loved Rachel more. Torah says, Vayehav Rachel mi Leah. Next 2 psukim later it says, Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah. What kind of snua Leah? Yaakov to hate Leah? First of all, if he hated her, how did he live with her? And according to that, the Shvatim were B'nei HaSnua. They say Yaakov even hated his wife. All it says is he loved Rachel more. But if you can have a greater connection, you have lesser of a connection, So in that lesser connection, you're disassociated. That's Sina. Snua Leff. Doesn't mean he hated her. It means he felt disconnected from her, disassociated in a small way. And that small way was called Sina. So Sina doesn't mean you hate somebody's guts. It means you don't feel a connection with them. That's what it means. Sheyorda Sina la'olam. Har Sinai. Since we were given the Torah and we accepted a different lifestyle than the nations of the world, they remain with 7 mitzvahs, and they remain to be moral, and we have 613 mitzvahs, and we have to be holy, so there can't be a total assimilation between Yidden and Goyim. So Misham Yorda Sina La'olam. The Rebbeinu Shalom created a safety valve between Yidden and Goyim called Sina, disassociation. The Goyim can love us, and they can sacrifice their lives for us, but it's them and us. It's not us. They're doing it for those Jews. They may admire us, they may even like us, but we're not part of them from their standpoint. From our standpoint, we have to choose not to be part. But the Rebbeinu Shalom made it that a Goy, even the best of them, never feel that Jews are part of them. They may respect us, they may admire us, they may love us, they may be Moser Nefesh for us, but it's for them. It's not for us from a Goyish standpoint. So that's Misham Yorda Sina La'olam. And that's what it says. Halacha L'Moshe Misinai, same thing. From Har Sinai came a halacha. The Rebbe Shalom created a fact of nature, which is a halacha, halichas olam, that Esav Soneas Yaakov. Again, they don't hate our guts. Many fine goyim, but they don't feel connected to us. And that way it helps us to be able to be insulated from the nations of the world and not to assimilate. And that's what a medrash means, that the whole 7 days of Sukkot, we bring korbanos for the sake of the goyim. They should love us, and they still hate us. That's a reason to be happy, because many times we think the reason goyim hate us is something wrong with us, right? Maybe they're tiners or tiners, right? They think that we're communists or we're fascists or we're people that don't care about everybody, or people who want to rule over everybody, or every single opposite thing is the reason why they hate us. So sometimes we begin to think that maybe they're right, maybe something's wrong with us. But for 7 days we do for them. And al pi derech hateva, they should love us. And they still hate us, assuming that it's not because something's wrong with us. It's because that's how the Rebbeinu Shalom wants the world to be. And the Sina is not that they hate our guts, but they still don't feel connection. They feel disconnected from us. And that's a simcha, because that means that the Rebbeinu Shalom did it so we can preserve our identity as Yidden, as a Goy Kadosh, as a Mamleches Kohen in the Goy Kadosh, as the Mishkan of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's why it happens. And that's a simcha. Not happening because something's wrong with us. Not happening even because the Goyim hate us for whatever reasons they say. It's because the Rebbeinu Shalom put into nature that there's always a separation between Yidden and Goyim. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. So that is the real root, the real foundation of anti-Semitism is Misham Yorda Sina La'olam and Esav Soneas Yaakov, that the Rebbeinu Shalom did us a favor. He made it easy that we shouldn't assimilate amongst the Goyim, in order that there should be a separation, a insulation between Yidden and Goyim. And like Chaim Volozhiner says, if we make Kiddush, then the guy won't have to make Havdalah. And if we don't make Kiddush, then that separation is going to have to come from the negative side, from their side, not from our side. It's no choice. Either we're Vayishkon Yisrael Betach Badad on Simchas Torah, or Eicha Yoshva Badad on Tisha B'Av. Just to end, there's another medrash that puts it into even more of a focus, how to accomplish this. The medrash is in Paneach Rosa in Parshas Noach, if you want to look it up. The medrash says, "L'mishbechosehem yotzu min ha-teva." When they went into the teva for the entire year, the men and women were separate. But when they came out of the teva, they came out by mishpacha. Men and women were again reunited. So the pasuk says, "L'mishbechosehem yotzu min ha-teva." Says the medrash, "Mikan sheyotze mibeis hakneses mishpachos." We don't daven together, right? The women are behind the mechitza, and the men are on the other side of the mechitza. But when you leave the shul, you should leave by family. That's a medrash, based on what it says by Noach. What's the connection? Very simple. It's a play on words. Teva is a boat, but in the lashon of the Mishnah, the Teva was the Aron Kodesh. Motzinas HaTeva, Rechova Shlir, by the Tainus. Teva is how they refer to the Aron Kodesh. So it's a play on words. When you leave the Teva, when you leave the Aron Kodesh, leave by family. Cute. In English, that is preserved, because we refer to Noah's Ark and the Holy Ark. So when you leave the Ark, leave by family. Cute. What does it really mean? Like the Meiri said, the negative influences, and again, they can be terrible negative influences, or just not the kind of influences that a Jew has to have. They're not Kedusha. They may be moral, but they're not Kedusha. So those influences, those negative influences surround us. They're everywhere. We're like an ocean. The way to escape it is to make yourself a teva, to make yourself a craft that doesn't let that influence in, where it's insulated from those influences. That's the teva. Similarly, we are surrounded by floodwaters everywhere, negative influences. How do you survive them? By creating a teva. What's a teva? Yeshivas, seminaries, kehilas like this kehila, where you insulate yourself inside a teva that's a yeshiva, a seminary, a kehila, and that's how you protect yourself from the negative influences around. There's only one problem. You can't spend your whole life in a yeshiva or a seminary or even in a shul. I know it's beginning to feel like that now, but Elisha, you can't spend your whole life in a shul. So how can you leave and still be protected? That's what the Medrash says. If you want to leave that teva and still be protected, then you have to create families that have the same values and standards as the yeshiva, as the kehila, and your home then becomes a lifeboat. And you can leave the mothership and still be protected. If your mishpacha has the same values as the mothership, as the teva. If you want to be able to leave those tevos, then you create a mishpacha that has the same values and standards as your kehila, as your yeshiva, as your seminary, and then you can leave those institutions because your family becomes a lifeboat that's a continuation, an extension of the mothership that you were in, right? When you went to that yeshiva, when you're in the shul, and when you're in the seminary. So that's what we're faced with. The rise of anti-Semitism all over the world has to remind us who we are. And it's working to a certain degree, because those on the college campuses who were taught to think, or taught not to think, right, are beginning to see that maybe they better find out what it means to be a Yid, because these goyim hate us, right? So maybe there's something about us that they hate. What it's all about, right? It's a shame to be hated, not even know who you are. So there's a surge of people wanting to find their identity as Yid because of this anti-Semitism. So on the one hand, it's a terrible, terrible tzara. On the second hand, there is a silver lining to that cloud, that Yidden are beginning to think, if the Goyim hate us, then maybe there's something about us that they hate, some reason why we're not them and they're not us. And when the Yid starts to think like that, and eventually he makes Kiddush, so it'll stop the Havdalah that the Goyim are making. So Mirza Hashem, that one aspect of this tzara, that the anti-Semites are coming out of the woodwork, right? And mostly in the places where academia, supposedly people who are big thinkers and champions of being what's it called, tolerant or whatever, is coming out what the deep roots of Sina Yorda La'olam and Esav Soneus Yaakov, and Yidden are waking up to the fact that maybe there's a difference between Jews and Goyim. If they are making a big deal, then maybe there's something that we have to think about, what it means to be a Yid.